Juliana Marins was 26 years old, solo backpacking across Southeast Asia, chasing adventure and living the dream. She signed up for a guided trek up Mount Rinjani in Indonesia, an epic sunrise hike up an active volcano. But on summit day, something went very wrong. Juliana got separated from her group, and just after sunrise, she slipped and fell hundreds of meters into the crater. This is a story of a dream trip that turned into an absolute nightmare. Juliana Marins was a 26-year-old Brazilian publicist and solo traveler. Since February, she'd been backpacking through Southeast Asia, exploring Vietnam, Thailand, and the Philippines, sharing her adventures online along the way. Friends and family described her as free-spirited, curious, and brave. And this trip was something that she dreamed about and made happen on her own. By June, she had her sights set on Indonesia's second highest volcano, Mount Rinjani. The government has been actively promoting tourism in the region since 2010, positioning Lombok as Indonesia's next big destination after Bali. And for the locals, tourism is a major source of income. Mount Rinjani rises above the island of Lombok, Indonesia, an active stratovolcano that towers over 12,200 feet or 3,700 meters. It's part of the Sunda Arc, a string of explosive volcanoes along the Pacific Ring of Fire near Bali and Flores. Rinjani is one of 129 active volcanoes in the country, and it's no sleeping giant. It last erupted in 2016, and before that, multiple eruptions in 2010 and 2015, with ash plumes, lava flows, and even a deadly mud flow in 1994 that killed 30 villagers. So yeah, it's beautiful, but it is no joke. To locals, Rinjani isn't just a mountain, it's a sacred guardian. People make pilgrimages here to pray, give offerings, and to ask for protection. But for the tourists, well, it's a top-tier bucket list hike. Since 2010, the Indonesian government has heavily promoted Lombok as a must-see destination, second only to Bali. And that push has worked. Rinjani now sees over 150,000 hikers every year. Lonely Planet calls it one of the best treks in the world, but best does not always mean easy. And here's the part that a lot of people don't realize is that you just don't roll up to the mountain and start hiking to the summit. First, you've got to get to the base of the mountain, and that's a hike in itself. You're walking through thick heat and grassy savanna, carrying gear uphill just to reach the official trailhead. You're already sweating before the real climb even starts. Even the shortest route up Rinjani takes 2 full days, and the longer ones up to 4. On day 1, hikers cover about 7 kilometers or 4.3 miles. The first stretch is exposed and dry with heat in the 25 to 30 degree range, Celsius, or 77 to 86 Fahrenheit, and the sun just beats down on you. Then the elevation gain kicks in, over 1,480 meters or nearly 5,000 feet. And interestingly, some guides do health checks to their clients before the climb even starts. They check their blood pressure, heart rate, because the altitude can hit fast and hard. But not all companies do that. By late afternoon on that first day of hiking, the landscape shifts. Dry grass turns to black volcanic ash and loose rock. Every step becomes a slog. It's dusty, it's slippery, your legs are jelly by the time you reach the crater rim, which is where they camp for the night. And then the next day at 2 a.m., summit day begins. The whole point is to get up there for sunrise. So you get up early in the freezing dark, climb with a headlamp through cold winds and the volcanic sand. The final summit push is only about 1 kilometer or a half a mile long, but it takes 3 hours. You climb up 3 steps and then you slide 2 steps back because it's so sandy and soft. Over and over again with the wind howling, fingers numb, and it's pitch black. And it's also another about 1,000 meters or 3,500 feet of elevation gain. It's steep and it is exhausting. And if you're lucky, you hit the summit just in time for sunrise, and that's when the reward hits. There's unreal views of the crater lake below, clouds rolling past your feet, the whole volcano stretching beneath you. But this trail is exposed, unpredictable, and way tougher than it looks on a map. For the unprepared or even the unlucky, this hike can flip from challenging to deadly in a heartbeat. And for Juliana, it did. On the morning of Saturday, June 22nd, Juliana set out on the Rinjani trek with 5 other hikers and 1 guide. Day 1 went smoothly, but on day 2, summit day, that's where everything started to go wrong. They began the climb at about 2 in the morning in total darkness. Headlamps on, wind was howling, the air is thinner, and your legs are burning, and you can't see much beyond the beam of your flashlight. And at some point that morning, Juliana asked to rest, and she was exhausted. For reasons that are still unclear, but possibly because there was only one guide, and the rest of the group wanted to keep going, Juliana was left alone on the trail. According to her family, she sat there alone for over an hour. Around 6 a.m., just after first light, everything changed. Juliana slipped and fell nearly 300 meters or almost 1,000 feet into a ravine. The guide noticed that something was wrong when they saw her backpack still on the trail, and below that was her walking stick and her flashlight. The guide later claimed that he'd only left her alone for 3 minutes. He says he heard her cries and saw her flashlight down below, and then he called for help right away. But Juliana's father tells a different story. He says that the guide left her for 40 to 50 minutes and took a smoke break. And he doesn't just blame the guide, he blames the national park staff too for not being prepared for an emergency like this. Meanwhile, another group of hikers nearby had a drone and they launched it and found her down the ravine. Incredibly, she was still alive. The drone captured her waving, conscious, moving, but stranded on a really steep ledge. And there was no way for anyone to reach her. It was just too steep. But the hikers who were flying the drone got creative and they wrote "wait" on a piece of paper and dropped it down below. She could see it. They shouted down for her to hold on and that help was on the way. They waited for about 3 hours, putting off their own summit climb and hoping that anyone would come to rescue her. Juliana had survived that fall, but getting to her was a whole other battle. Local search and rescue teams had to scramble, assembling on short notice and climbing over 3,000 meters or 10,000 feet to reach her. They were hauling ropes, medical supplies, and gear, and they were already exhausted before the rescue even began. There's also no trees in the area, nothing for them to use as anchors for the ropes. They had to build makeshift setups, one at the ridge and another 400 meters down on a narrow ledge that was only 3 meters wide. And only a small team could ascend at a time because the slope was so steep and unstable that a single misstep could cause a landslide and bury Juliana. And then the weather turned. Dense fog dropped visibility to just a few meters, and the ropes were slick with rain, their gear was soaked, and the winds were howling, so a helicopter rescue was totally out of the question. It was just too dangerous to fly. By the time the main search and rescue team arrived on Saturday evening, Juliana was no longer at the spot where the drone had first seen her. Thermal drones picked her up again on Monday morning and she had fallen again, twice as far as her initial fall. Conditions were still brutal and everything was soaked, clothes, backpacks, gear, and it made rappelling dangerous and painfully slow. When rescuers reached her new location, she was gone again. And they radioed back to the 48-person team, ready to descend even further, but heavy fog rolled in again and they were forced to stop. Finally, on Wednesday, June 24th, on the third attempt, rescuers finally reached her. But it was too late. Juliana had passed away. She had suffered multiple fractures to her spine, chest, and legs, and the most severe injuries were to her back, which caused massive internal bleeding. Doctors believe that she died within 20 minutes of that second fall after losing consciousness. Her official cause of death was listed as internal bleeding caused by organ damage and multiple bone fractures, and there was no evidence of hypothermia. In the days after her death, her family spoke out, heartbroken and furious. They believe that she could have been saved if rescuers had reached her sooner. They said Juliana suffered great negligence on the part of the rescue team. If the team had reached her within 7 hours, Juliana would still be alive. At the same time, they expressed deep gratitude to the volunteers, the people who spent 5 exhausting days on the mountain and ultimately recovered her. Juliana's sister also blamed the guide, saying that Juliana was left alone for more than an hour before she fell, raising serious questions about how the trek was managed. Back in Indonesia, the head of the rescue agency met with her family personally. He explained the extreme weather, the terrain, and the logistical nightmares that they faced. The family acknowledged those challenges, but it didn't ease the pain or shake the feeling that Juliana had been failed. Juliana's story hit hard across the global hiking community, especially among people who had been to Rinjani before and knew how dangerous it was. Lots of hikers spoke up about how the trek was much different than they expected. One hiker told Brazilian media that conditions on the day of Juliana's fall were terrible. Slippery trails, low visibility, and loose volcanic sand. These are all pretty well-known hazards, but they're not always talked about. And there was one question echoing everywhere. Why was the trail still open during the rescue operation? authorities didn't close the route until 3 days after her fall, after there was pressure from other hikers and locals. And Juliana wasn't the first fatality on Rinjani. Just a month earlier, a Malaysian hiker died after falling from a cliff. A few days after Juliana's fall, another tourist slipped during a descent and was carried off the mountain with injuries. In May, another hiker died in a fall. And in October of 2024, a 16-year-old was found dead after going missing on the mountain. Between 2017 and 2024, at least 9 hikers have died on Rinjani from exhaustion, injury, or falls. Many hikers spoke up after her death, not just to express sympathy, but to say that this could have been any of them. Because Rinjani isn't just tough, it's deeply misunderstood. That final stretch to the summit is the hardest push. You wake up really early in the morning, it's freezing, you're sleep deprived and sore from the previous day's climb, and then you're scrambling uphill in the dark on loose ash and scree, where every step slides you backwards. One hiker said only a third of their group made the summit, and the rest were struggling with symptoms of altitude sickness, slurred speech. They were stumbling and had shortness of breath. And these were all people who signed waivers, wore proper gear, and were told that it would be hard. But still, many said that the reality doesn't match the marketing. The crater lake that you see, the sunrise, the epic drone shots, they make it look like a dream hike. But what you don't see is the exhaustion and the injuries, the mental toll that it takes. One hiker said that social media makes it look like a bucket list item. But this isn't a casual vacation hike. This is the kind of trek that you really have to train for. Another hiker said that they posted their entire Rinjani experience online because they couldn't find any honest information before they went. And this guy almost quit due to exhaustion. His tour group had 10 hikers to 1 guide, and any slower hikers on that hike were just left behind. He also said that headlamps weren't even guaranteed despite what the website said. They showed up and they didn't have enough for everyone. One hiker didn't even realize how dangerous those drop-offs were on the way to the summit until it got light out. He said the trail can be treacherous. I had to use both hands and feet to climb. I saw people slipping all around me. And that's why Juliana's story hits so hard, because she didn't wander off the trail. She didn't ignore the conditions. She just did what you're supposed to do. Book a tour, trust the system, take a break when you're tired. And despite that, she didn't make it home. This wasn't just a freak accident, it was a tragedy shaped by flawed systems, misleading expectations, and a lack of real emergency infrastructure. And for tourists and hikers watching from around the world, it was a gut check. Juliana's group had 1 guide for 5 hikers, which is a pretty common setup, but on a mountain like Rinjani, it leaves 0 room for anything to go wrong. If someone gets tired or falls behind or gets injured even, the guide has to make an impossible choice. Stay with them and leave the group, maybe not summit, or go on and just leave somebody alone. With 2 guides, there's a safer option: one can help and one can continue. But many tour companies don't offer that by default, and in Juliana's case, it might have made all the difference. Guides also feel pressure to get clients to the summit because if they don't, then they might demand a refund. And that pressure can lead to dangerous decisions, pushing too hard, ignoring warning signs, or leaving people behind. Where she fell, from a distance, it might have looked like Juliana wasn't that far down, but the reality of it was brutal. Drone footage from the opposite side of the ravine shows just how steep it was. She was hundreds of meters down in a jagged chute of scree and loose ash. It was basically a vertical cliff, and the ropes that the rescuers had weren't long enough at first, so they had to retreat and come back and then climb down with more. It was exhausting, dangerous work, and the terrain was very unstable. A lot of people question why the rescue took so long, but one of the reasons is there's absolutely no emergency infrastructure up there. Once someone is reported missing, people have to hike down to the mountain, find a signal to get help, call for help, and there's no radios, no towers, no relay points. They have to go to where they can get service, and that can take hours. Then you call in a team, and they have to gather the ropes and medical gear, all the equipment, and hike back up, which could take 8-9 hours. And then the larger rescue teams, they weren't even on the island. They had to be flown in from somewhere else. So yes, it was slow, but not because of laziness or apathy. It was slow because the system isn't really built for emergencies. Abdul Haris Agam, an experienced outdoor operator and one of the volunteers who retrieved Juliana's body, put it pretty plainly. He said that if rescue had started sooner, she would have survived.
Minta maaf tidak bisa membawa pulang Juliana dengan selamat karena kondisi medan
He pointed to a lack of essential equipment, saying that there should be ropes stashed along the trail, and also that none of the guides were properly trained in rescue. There was no helicopter drills, there was no emergency rehearsals. This isn't the first time it happened. In October, a GAM rescued an Irish climber who fell near the summit just hours after retrieving the body of another fallen climber. After the backlash, the Indonesian government said that they would make changes. There would be stricter supervision of tour operators and guides, a potential rescue center along the Rinjani Trail, better training for porters in emergency response, long-term plans for more safety posts stocked with gear, and maybe finally limits on how many hikers can go up at once. In one popular hike in Malaysia, they cap hikers at 120 per day, whereas Rinjani allows 700. The other mountain has licensed guides and rescues are rare. But on Rinjani, they're becoming routine. Police in Lombok are currently investigating Juliana's death. They're interviewing the guide, the trekking organizer, porters, and forestry police officers. They're also coordinating with Brazilian authorities to keep the family updated. Juliana did what so many of us dream of. She chased adventure, she booked the tour, she trusted the system, and followed all the rules. And this is a reminder of how fast things can go wrong, especially in places where there's no backup plan, no quick rescue, and no room for error. So if you're planning that once-in-a-lifetime trek, the bucket list summit, or that big solo trip, ask questions, trust your gut, and don't ever be afraid to turn around. And now I want to leave you with Juliana's own words. It's a message she sent home to her mother at the start of her trip. She said, "I love you so much. I was heartbroken when we said goodbye. In fact, that's the only thing that worries me, letting you, Papi, or my sister be disappointed. Other than that, I'm not afraid of much. I was raised by a woman who could solve any problem. And I am like that too. I have different desires and dreams. I love you all very much. And I will always be grateful for all the support, care, and affection. That is what makes me fearless. Rest in peace, Juliana."